Hello guys, welcome back to the channel. So yeah, I've already recorded this video once, and I'm recording it again because I wasn't fully satisfied with how it came out. There's been a lot of noise recently about a situation involving a young star player skipping post-game media duties. And honestly, I think the entire discussion has been blown way out of proportion. From what I understand, and I could be wrong here, but in most professional basketball environments, not every player is required to speak after the game. Usually it's the highest scorer or one or two selected players depending on performance, team protocol, or media requests. It's not an automatic obligation for every single player on the roster. In this case, the player in question didn't participate in post-game media, and suddenly it's being treated like some kind of controversy. But the important detail that keeps getting ignored is simple. There was no requirement for her to speak in that situation. She had already done media availability before the game. She fulfilled media duties that were required of her. So when she didn't appear afterward, it wasn't a refusal of obligation. It was just a non-required appearance not happening. And I keep asking the same question. Why is this being turned into such a big deal? Because from a logical standpoint, there's nothing unusual here. A player didn't do something they weren't obligated to do. That should be the end of the discussion. But instead, it became a talking point after a journalist covering a professional sports team began posting publicly that the player was not making herself available. The claim was that attempts were made to reach team communication staff and that the player wasn't taking questions. That post started gaining traction, and then others began repeating it, amplifying it, and adding their own interpretations. What started as a simple observation quickly turned into a narrative. And this is where things usually spiral in modern sports media. One post becomes a discussion, the discussion becomes a controversy, and suddenly the original context gets completely lost. Let's also be honest about something else. Players like this generate massive attention. Media outlets, journalists, commentators, and content creators all benefit from that attention. More clicks, more views, more engagement, more revenue. That's just how the ecosystem works now. So when a high-profile player is involved, there's always going to be pressure to get quotes, reactions, emotional responses, anything that can drive engagement. And while that incentive structure is real, it doesn't automatically mean players are obligated to provide that access beyond what is required. Because here's the key point. Obligation is not the same thing as expectation. Just because someone is interesting to talk about doesn't mean they owe you conversation every single time. And I think that distinction is where a lot of people are getting lost in this discussion. What made this situation even more complicated is that the same person who initially raised the concern continued pushing the narrative and then later published commentary that leaned heavily critical of the player's performance and demeanor. The framing wasn't neutral analysis of the game. It felt more like the focus shifted toward questioning the player's status, mentality, and reception from the crowd, rather than balancing that with credit to the opposing team's performance. Now, to be fair, the player did have a rough outing. The crowd environment was intense. The physicality was high. Those factors absolutely can affect performance. That's part of competitive sports at the highest level. But the way the coverage was structured felt uneven. It leaned heavily into criticism of the player rather than providing a balanced breakdown of both sides of the game. And again, this isn't about attacking any individual journalist. It's more about how narratives form. One storyline takes hold, everything starts getting filtered through that lens. The player had a bad game, yes, but turning that into a broader narrative about avoidance or disengagement because of one missing media appearance feels like a stretch. Now, let's address something important. If the player had actually been required to speak and refused, that would be a completely different situation. If there was a formal obligation and that obligation was ignored, then discussion about fines, discipline, or consequences would be valid. But that's not what happened here. There was no contractual requirement in this case, so treating it like a breach of duty is inaccurate. And I want to be clear about something else. No player owes the media unlimited access to their time. They don't owe reporters emotional reactions. They don't owe analysts immediate breakdowns. They don't owe content creators material for discussion. They are obligated to follow league rules and team policies. Beyond that, everything else is situational and often voluntary. And realistically, think about the human side of it. You've just come off a difficult game. It didn't go well. You've been physically challenged, possibly hit or bumped hard during play, and emotionally, you're probably frustrated with the result. In that moment, choosing not to step in front of cameras when it's not required is completely understandable. Why would anyone voluntarily put themselves into a high-pressure media environment immediately after that? Especially when you have no control over the tone of the questions, the framing of the answers, or how anything will be clipped and circulated online afterward. This is where the broader issue comes in. Modern sports media is not just reporting anymore. It's also content creation, narrative building, and engagement farming. That means players often become central figures in stories that extend far beyond the actual game. And once that happens, every small detail gets magnified. There's also a tendency in some coverage to treat athletes as if they exist primarily for media consumption. And when they don't behave in a way that satisfies that expectation, it gets framed as a problem. But that framing is exactly what creates unnecessary tension. There's a difference between constructive reporting and manufactured controversy. And from the outside, this situation looks a lot closer to the second one. I also think it's worth remembering that this isn't the first time something like this has happened. Players have skipped non-mandatory media moments before. It's just that it usually doesn't become a headline unless someone decides to push it in that direction. The difference here is amplification. Once a prominent voice highlights it, others pick it up, and suddenly it becomes a thing. But if you strip everything back, the core facts remain simple. No obligation was violated, no rule was broken. A player completed required media duties and did not participate in optional post-game availability. That's it. Everything else is interpretation layered on top. And honestly, in my opinion, situations like this often say more about the media environment than they do about the player. When attention becomes the primary currency, narratives will naturally form around whatever drives engagement, even if the underlying event is minor. At some point, teams may even start adjusting how they handle media access after games if they feel the external pressure is becoming too disruptive for players. That would create tension between access and protection, but it wouldn't be surprising if it eventually happens. Because from a team perspective, protecting player focus and mental state is always going to matter more than satisfying external commentary. And that brings us back to the central question. Was this ever really a controversy, or did it become one because it was useful to frame it that way? To me, it feels like the latter. But anyway, that's just my take on it. Let me know what you think in the comments below, and I'll see you in the next one.